So a lot of people have been talking about this movie on social media, but thanks to what could only be charitably called the discourse with Star Wars The Last Jedi, I have developed a new superpower. It's called completely ignoring everyone who talks about Star Wars forever. So that's how I went into this movie. Also, as an aside, I am someone who likes the sequel trilogy, but also gets why some don't. I think those people are missing out and define Star Wars a bit too narrowly, but hey, that's your opinion, and this video will be mine. So, what do I think about Star Wars, the last movie in the sequel trilogy? It sucks. It sucks so much. I'm sorry, guys. I'm gonna talk about this movie a lot as like a rant. The spoilers abound. I'm gonna have a static image in the background. So yeah, spoilers starting now, probably. But anyway, here's how I'm gonna break things down. This movie had two roles that it needed to fill to satisfy everyone. First, it needed to follow thematically from The Last Jedi and all the arcs and stuff like that, and just the feeling overall that those movies had. And two, it needed to pull back the Star Wars fans that it lost with The Last Jedi. If it only did the former, it would be exactly the movie that I wanted. If it only pulled the fans in, then I'd be disappointed, but at least I'd get it. But what this movie did is land straight into my mom's coffee because it's half and half, and it's just trash. That's my summary of the movie. That's my impression of what happened here, but let me explain what I mean by that. Here's how I think it went down. JJ saw that there are two sides of the fan base. There's the lore side and the theme side. The theme side are people that like the themes of Star Wars, the more space adventure feeling, but they like the themes and the characters and things being more metaphysical than defined. The Force is merely a physical representation of characters and people going through arcs and learning how to deal with themselves and their issues. And then there was the lore group. The lore group were the people that liked the universe of Star Wars, the galactic spanning planets, all these different alien races and politics and people coming together to fight evil and different Force users with all these magical powers and basically the prequels. This group grew up with the prequels, which were very heavy on world building and lore, but fell flat emotionally. They replaced the whimsical stuff with the scientific, and not in a way that Star Trek does, where they create a defined universe to pose difficult moral questions, but just as like an open world video game where this stuff exists and it's surface level cool and it makes the universe feel like a universe, but what you see is what you get. And there's really no point to it beyond that. People who see Star Wars for that kind of stuff, like the lore and the trinkets and the powerful items and the very defined power sets, are the lore group. They don't care as much about theme. What they want is a hero's journey with some twists and turns and cool world building. And honestly, there is nothing wrong with that inherently. The divide is also not really clean cut in practice, and most people like some combination of lore and theme in their Star Wars. I would say most of the lore people don't want an entirely soulless story, and the theme people don't hate lore. World building is cool, and lore is cool. It's just that the theme people like myself, tend to think it should be in service to the themes you're trying to push in your movie, not just a thing quarantined off from the main plot. It's like the clone troopers part of the Clone Wars where Obi-Wan goes to look at the clone troopers. There's nothing really emotional there. There's no journey. It's just he goes to a rainy planet and sees some lore and then fights another bounty hunter lore piece, and it's just lore. It's just world building. There's nothing like there that make me like care about Obi-Wan. It's stuff like that that the theme people like to avoid, which is why a lot of them were just like, I don't care about world building at all, because what they're really saying is, I don't want the world building to even tangentially threaten to ruin the overall story. And I understand that perspective as well. There's two sides to Star Wars lore and theme, but these sides are not incompatible inherently. They can be, for lack of a better word, balanced. But doing both requires a very, very delicate touch, and JJ does not have that touch. JJ tried to appeal to both groups at the same time in the worst way possible, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about various reasons why. If I were to say my biggest problem with this movie is that there really isn't an overarching theme to anything, like at all. Like, things happen, don't get me wrong, and the characters react to those things in ways you'd expect the characters to react in. Mostly, there are exceptions, but mostly everyone here is pretty, consistent. The problem is that there isn't an overarching theme beyond just stop the bad guy. Okay, maybe that's not fair. There is somewhere in here a theme about rejecting the destiny thrust onto you and finding a family, and that is kind of relevant to Rey's story, but the way that they do it is so hollow to me, so soulless, that it only took me a bit of thinking about the movie to really kind of claw at that maybe being a theme. Beyond that, just the way it's done, it's not like The Last Jedi. I'll explain more of what I mean later, but it's to the point where it's so soulless the way that they do what might be the theme of this movie, and how much they contradict The Last Jedi in the process, that it almost feels like that there really isn't any theme. I can tell you for sure that while watching the movie, it felt like there was no theme. It certainly didn't really come together to resembling anything until toward the end. There are some other themes as well. I happen to have read something while recording this that talks about how it's about mercy because Rey heals people instead of kills people. But these are, again, just little moments. There are things in this movie that happen that could mean something in isolation, but the movie doesn't coalesce to a lot. You could say maybe Rey's story coalesces into something, but Poe's and Finn's, I'll talk about that later, but basically this entire movie doesn't coalesce into something. Rey's story and Ben's story may coalesce into something, but everyone else is just kind of there. And as a result, I feel like that's why I almost felt like there was no theme to it. It's like, this is very much like The Last Jedi, and this whole series was Rey's story, but in The Last Jedi, the other characters had their own arcs and things to do and things to learn, and in this one, really, Rey maybe has something to do, and everyone else is kind of just there spouting exposition dialogue. It's just... We'll get more into that in a minute, though. There is debatably the theme of redemption, but it's mangled in what, in my eyes, is the worst part of the film, which we'll get to much later. But there isn't nearly as strong of theming as in the original trilogy or the first two sequel movies. In The Force Awakens, the theme was kind of like stepping up to your destiny, stepping up to be better, putting behind the things that that you went through to do the right thing. The Last Jedi really picked up that theme and made it about a bunch of different things as well, about failure, about the systemic problems of the galaxy, about rejecting your trauma to do the right thing. It was about, you know what, I made a video on it. I'll link it below. Go watch it. Um, but this movie just feels hollow. It really, thinking about The Last Jedi was fun because I could view it in a lot of different ways and have a satisfying movie. With Rise of Skywalker, it's more of a search out of like desperation. I'm like poking my hands through the rubble. I have to go searching for meaning to tell myself I like this movie more than I did. It's the difference between a movie encouraging thought and just like me wanting to take it easy from the movie. It's like I feel bad for the movie almost. The movie just is. It's literally like there's not a lot of subtext. There's some moments of subtext though, and we can go ahead and talk about them now. There are some things that are like it's on the nose, but there are visuals and there's some stuff going on. There are things you can look at and be like, okay, this could be a thing. There's a lot of this kind of imagery in Star Wars, in this sequel trilogy Star Wars films, of Rey being a woman and bringing this feminine energy to the Force. Sidious is a super powerful, all about raw strength kind of person, kind of representing more of a toxic masculine energy. Not that all masculine energy is toxic. Don't worry, people. Just, some of it can be. And Rey's energy overpowers his toxic energy, and it's like the energy of like the light side of nurturing and protection overpowering the energy of violence and rage. There are little moments like that you can see comparing the light side of the Force to like a mom, basically, and the dark side to like a toxic deadbeat dad. And then there's a lot of other things that are really good, like how Rey is someone that takes a lot of dark side stuff and makes it light side stuff instead, like how she's a healer. She brings back people from the dead. Bringing back people from the dead was the dark side power that caused Anakin to want to go to the dark side in the prequels. But with Rey, it becomes something light side, something nurturing. There's a lot of this kind of stuff in these films. There's also a theme of spiritual versus nature, or spiritual and nature versus machine and like military might in this film, like the physical and tangible versus the spiritual. Like there's the alien horse things riding on top of the destroyer, and the First Order are like, why can't we track their speeders? And the other guy's like, because we can't see their speeders, because they're not speeders, they're actual biological entities, they're actual creatures. And there's how Palpatine is more machine than man, like Vader. He isn't a Force ghost, he isn't spiritual, he is physical, tangible, where the light side people are all spiritual, they're all Force ghosts. Luke was kind of like representing the fact that the dark side isn't really the true meaning of the Force. Them being all spirits is kind of like the light side gets the Force, but the dark side don't. Like, the light side lives in harmony with the Force, but Palpatine and the dark side are more like invaders. They're stealing from the Force. They don't live in harmony with it. They feed off of it. It almost makes sense now why there was a rule of two from this perspective, since from the dark side's point of view, there's only so much Force to go around. And then Palpatine literally sucks away the light side of the Force from Rey and Ben to stay alive in his scene. There's a lot of themes of like the dark side needing to feed and consume, and the light side living in harmony and bringing life. And he needs to do that to suck away the Force to stay alive. He's hooked up to these machines. He's powerful, but also he's trapped at the bottom of the Death Star in his own failure. Unlike Rey, Palpatine never made it out of his version of the dark cave on an island. But since the light side heroes got past their failures and their struggles, they get to be Force ghosts. Palpatine does not, but they do, because they get it and the dark side doesn't. And there are other moments of the movie I liked. I liked when Rey kills Kylo, but then brings him back, and that's when he turns to the light side. There are some issues that I have with it. Like, I feel as though a lot of this trilogy was pushing the ideal of the thing that makes a Jedi great isn't combat, but it's defending things that you love. It's non-interventionism. It's, you know, finding a non-violent and peaceful way to keep peace. It is like setting by example how you want the universe to be run while also getting stuff done. And that's something that has a lot of optimism to it. So Rey turning Kylo to the light side by literally murdering him with like a red lightsaber can run counter to that. At the same time, Rey literally murdering Kylo is literally killing Kylo, and he becomes Ben Solo because Kylo is dead. So I like that element of it, but then there are other elements I don't like. It's the same thing with the conversation he has with Han Solo. The conversation with his dad is great, and I liked how Han Solo said, "I know." I looked at that scene as Han Solo being a Force ghost. Some people have said that scene doesn't make sense. I've looked at it as being a Force ghost, or him transporting his mind somehow, kind of like it's like a Force ghost version of like what Rey and Kylo was doing, but it's Han doing it to Ben from like the grave. I don't know. I thought that I got the impression that that was actually Han and not a figment of Ben's imagination or him hallucinating. And or maybe that was Leia. Like maybe she came to him as Han Solo because she knew that Han Solo was the thing that was tearing him up inside the most, because that was his dark side, his like most personal dark side thing. So there's some things to kind of poke and prod at there. The moment was a bit short, and the scenes before it were so empty that the moment doesn't hit as hard as it should. But like as its own scene, it was good, and in a better movie, this would have worked really, really well. And I liked that Leia's scene was really, really meta in the movie. Leia's final act. Leia is giving her life to reach out to her son one last time, one last moment to convert him to the light. And in a similar way, Carrie Fisher gave her all to this film series and this particular film for one last time before her passing. She was also on the script and stuff like that. She was doing some stuff in the background, not just being an actor. So she really did try really hard in these movies. Even just her acting alone was enough, but she was doing other stuff too. And she gave her all one last time before her unfortunate passing. And I don't know if that meta moment was attempted or like that was like intentional, but it's something that you can see there. Or at least something that I got out of it. And I like the actual visuals. I like that her scene looked like a tomb kind of thing. It was dark. Now, I don't know if that was the plan all along or if they made the plan after she died. I don't know if the reason why the scene where she's laying down looks like a tomb is because of a creative choice, or with it being shrouded in darkness, or if it's shrouded in darkness because they're trying to cover up the fact that the person laying down wasn't actually Carrie Fisher. So I don't know. I got the impression that they were trying to hide the fact that, they were trying to write around the fact that Carrie Fisher passed. But at the same time, the scene still worked because I knew about that limitation, and it all may not even be intentional. I'm not really sure. I like that scene. I think it's a much better use of the Force than like the CGI frozen dinner floating through space in The Last Jedi. That's honestly the one part of the film, as much as I love it, that I still will not defend. I love that Leia uses the Force, but the CGI in these films are sending me straight to the uncanny valley. This film is no different. They use CGI Leia again multiple times, and it never doesn't look out of place to me. Never. It always looks like CGI and takes me right out of the experience. I may be alone in this because a lot of people say the CGI in these movies are great, and I think it is great CGI, but it's still noticeable that it is CGI. I think to me, great CGI would be when I don't notice it. If I notice it, then it's not doing its job anymore. And the CGI moments don't do the job for me with the faces. They're still not there yet, in my opinion, and it's off-putting. I mean, CGI in general lately has been putting me into the uncanny valley. Like, even with how much I loved The Irishman, the de-aging effects weren't always perfect, but either way, at the very least, she got like a good moment on paper to go out on, even if they had to bring her back as like a CGI thing later on. I don't know. And then there are other moments. It was cool when Kylo becomes Ben Solo by throwing his lightsaber into the water. It kind of mirrored Luke doing the same thing in The Last Jedi, which itself is mirroring Luke throwing his lightsaber the last time we saw him before that point, which was in Return of the Jedi in the throne room scene. And I kind of like that mirroring. It's like the same thing but different contexts. I like that kind of thing. There are little moments in here, again, that are great, but they just don't coalesce. And Rey does some mirroring of her own. She says things like, I want to finish what Luke started, in the same way that Kylo says he wanted to finish what Vader started. There are, she uses Luke and Leia's lightsaber to beat Palpatine. And in the end, these two figures were like her parents, her like real parents that really raised her, and she ends up taking the name Skywalker. It's like her real parents helped her fight the bad guy in the end. There are little nice moments here. Again, that I can't keep stressing this enough. They don't coalesce into a lot. They're just really nice moments. In isolation, they're cool. If they were in a movie that was working towards something different, then I feel like they would be really cool. But in the movie that they're in, they almost frustrate me more because they just remind me of the lost potential of these films. What else? There's a lot of meaningful sacrifices in the film that drive home the stakes pretty well. I didn't like the dogfights in this movie very much. Something that some people I've heard, like Full Fat Videos, made a video recently. I try not to watch a lot of reviews or talk to a lot of people about these movies, but I couldn't help myself and watched a little bit of his, and he kind of just said something really like how I felt, which was there's no sense of geography in the dogfights like there was in The Last Jedi. In The Last Jedi, in the opening scene, I know exactly who is where, what's going on, what the stakes are. And in this film, it's just a bunch of ships flying around and it's hectic. And that's probably part of the point. It's like they're all in over their head. It's all hectic. It's supposed to be hectic. They're supposed to not know where they're going. But it creates that feeling. But I feel like that feeling can only carry the scene for so long before it stops being that feeling and it starts being like, okay, I don't know what's going on now, and I really need to know. Like, we get that the characters don't know. Maybe it's time that we the audience know what's going on, though, because otherwise this just looks like a bunch of CGI nonsense. Either way, you get a sense that everyone's throwing their all into this like final battle of the galaxy, and I like that. But even then, that comes with its own negatives, because I really felt as though this should have been like a massive battle where everyone knew what they were doing. This battle didn't need to be a battle of underdogs, because I felt like Luke in The Last Jedi did a lot to inspire the rebellion, and his story spread to those slave kids, so I could only imagine it spread to like the politicians that had like stuff going on, that Luke did this thing and he quote unquote trained another Jedi, Rey, who's also being trained by Leia. We have our own Jedi now to match Kylo, and Snoke is dead. So it's Jedi versus Jedi. If we have the ships, then we could take them. I felt as though this movie should have started with this massive fleet of the rebellion. It should have been a last battle for all the planets. It should have been these two armies clashing because they have hope now. And then maybe the central conflict for Rey could be that there's this hope to destroy the First Order, but she still wants to turn Kylo good. And maybe Finn and Rose's thing could be like the Republic wants to conquer, or wants to destroy the First Order, but the two of them just got on an adventure realizing that the rebellion is also buying ships from the same people selling ships to the First Order, and it's all a system, and there's systemic issues that need to be solved in this universe, in this galaxy, in order to stop this from happening again. And the Republic that's helping them is probably looking at this like the same way they looked at the battle like 30 years ago, where it's just like, just a thing that we gotta do. We gotta battle the bad guys occasionally, then go back to normal. Whereas the younger heroes are like, we can beat the bad guys together, but after this, we gotta have like a talk about like why this keeps happening. Because we really don't want it to happen again, and it's because of the way things are run, and things need to be different. And then maybe Poe could be like, we have this fleet, but am I good enough to run it? Am I good enough to take over for Leia? With all of this power, can I still follow the lesson that Holdo and Leia taught me in the last movie, which is fighting smart and fighting to not lose heroes and not have dead heroes? Rather than just going guns blazing. But as we'll discuss later, they took Poe and Finn's arcs in The Last Jedi and just threw them straight into the trash compactor. But anyway, what else is good in the movie? Let's go back to talking about the positives. John Williams' score is always good. It's always going to be one of, if not the best parts of every single one of these movies. This film is no different. The music is really good. They did a lot of things with like merging different soundtracks and themes. How it jumped from Rey's theme to a regular Star Wars theme to the dark side themes. A lot of good stuff where the music is telling you what's going on in the characters' heads without them having to say it. What else? The visuals are good. The camera work and cinematography are mostly good. They're usually like decent to good. The action scenes are usually fun, if not particularly creative. There's nothing in this film that's like The Last Jedi, where you look at a scene and think, this is going to be my desktop background for 4 months. It's like there's not a lot of that, but the scenes themselves are okay. There is some standout scenes. There's the one standout scene where they're both carrying this spaceship in that like zoomed out shot. They're like both fighting over the spaceship, and they're both on the edges of the frame, like the wide shot. It's kind of mirroring the scene in The Last Jedi in the throne room scene with the lightsaber, except instead of splitting a lightsaber, they're splitting the cruiser that they think that Chewie is on. And there's this like image of Kylo versus Rey trying to pull on an object and fight over it, and it's like they're fighting over the soul of this movie franchise in both scenes. In The Last Jedi, the soul of the franchise was represented by Luke's lightsaber, something that we, the audience, have significance in, and something that was significant to Ben Solo and Rey for different reasons. In this one, it's the ship that Chewie is on. Again, something that has different context to each hero for different reasons. Rey is Chewie's friend. Ben is just like Chewie was his dad's friend and represents like everything he's trying to move away from. So there's like this significance at play there in both of those kinds of like split the object scenes, for lack of a better word. And I like that. I like, again, little moments in this film are good. It just doesn't coalesce to a lot. And like another example of like, it's good, but with the cinematography, is Palpatine. Palpatine reveals to Rey that the ships are, blowing up and her friends are blowing up. It's a really good shot. It looks really cool. You get a sense that like her friends really are dying. However, we already had this scene in The Last Jedi, and like we don't need to repeat it, and it just feels weird to repeat it. And there's no context there that changes anything. You know, it's literally just echoing the scene for like the sake of echoing it. It's like JJ needed to do his version of that scene instead, when the ships being blown up was never the important part of that scene. It was Rey and what she had to deal with and her decision. So like again, good things tainted by bad things, good moments tainted by them leading to not a lot of things overall. But I like that split the object scene, and I like, you know, that they're always splitting the soul of this franchise down the middle, because they end up needing to learn to bring balance to the Force by fighting together. And that's how things stay whole. And in the end, they end up fighting Palpatine together, or at least trying to, before he just forces Kylo down a hole. And then Rey ends up beating him alone, which to me kind of defeats the whole purpose of. Okay, that's the negative. Okay, but anyway, on a similar note to Rey and Kylo, I like the expansion on the Force connection scenes. I like how it went from like, oh, you know, Kylo has some water on his hands, to like, Kylo can, you know, since Palpatine is super powerful, he's facilitating the Force connections between them. Those scenes are more powerful. And now he can rip off a necklace and like, oh, like I know where you are now. Like these scenes actually like progress the plot. They aren't just for character development. I like that. Not that they needed to have that in The Last Jedi, but like it works in this film. And they can actually like fight. Like they actually have like lightsaber duels. I thought that was cool. But that leads to a negative, because the Force connections themselves are cool, but everything they're talking about are either things that they already talked about and resolved in The Last Jedi, or they're just really, really dumb. But all right, stick to positives. What else? Lando was cool. Lando coming back and being someone that was able to like in part save the day in a similar way that Han saved Luke in A New Hope, in the Millennium Falcon. I thought that was cool. Cool bit of fan service, I guess. There's some callbacks here. There's a lot of like not really arcs closed, but like stories that were closed, things that had a bow on them. You know, people coming back in the end of a fight, you know, Chewie getting his medal. I know it's like a wink at the audience, that kind of scene. I think that kind of scene in a movie that had more going on would be cute. I think that it feels fan servicey to people that don't like The Rise of Skywalker, like myself, because there was so little substance everywhere else, that it's abundantly clear that JJ's like whole overarching goal going into this is, let's just give the fans fan service and not even think about like what any of it means. I think there was a way to give fans fan service while also building on the themes of The Last Jedi. I just don't think JJ cared enough to do both. I think JJ was so hyper focused on one of them, he didn't really care if it built on the themes of The Last Jedi. He just wanted to have fan service. That was the main thing. The themes and everything else, that was secondary. But I like the fan service moments in isolation. What else? Ben coming to the light in general was a smart choice. The execution left something to be desired, but as a plot point, I didn't want to see him get killed. And after some deliberation, I would have been perfectly fine with Reylo. I was always a little skeptical of it, because on the one hand, I didn't know if you know, it would ruin the ending of The Last Jedi if, you know, when Kylo and Rey split up, if they came back together in the end. I didn't know if that would undermine it a little bit. But after thinking about it, I don't think it would. And I think the theme of like learning from failure and redemption would have been is strengthened by Ben Solo returning. And while ultimately it's sad that he died, I really liked the moment where he was crying and he had that like goofy smile while he was holding Rey, and she was like, Ben, like she knew he was back. I really, really liked that moment. Like that moment really got to me. He has that like goofy, it's like the goofiest smile. It's like great. If the rest of the film was great, again, that moment probably would have made me cry, but instead it just made me yearn for what could have been with that scene. What else? Some of the humor was very funny. I actually liked the humor in The Last Jedi, with the exception of the like beginning with Poe. I like that in The Last Jedi. I liked the frog people and how they got their stuff destroyed by Rey not being able to control her power, and they just gave her this look like, really, dude? Like, I liked that humor. I liked in The Last Jedi Luke like tickling Rey with the leaf and like, oh, that's the Force, do you feel it? And then like slaps her hand. Like, I really like that. I thought that was like showing this old sort of cynical like bah humbug Luke. I thought that was a really good fit for him, especially the state he was in, and I felt that the jokes also kind of were just lent themselves to the story they were in and their dynamic. I didn't like the opening joke with Poe, but I liked the jokes and the humor in The Last Jedi overall. So that being said, I also liked the humor in The Rise of Skywalker. I liked the mechanic, the little alien mechanic. He was very cute. I liked the new droid Dio. She was very cute. I liked C-3PO and how they reacted to him and how he reacted to nobody reacting to them. I liked his moment where he was like, I just figured out we could do this another way or something like that, and they wiped his memory just then. That was really dark. Again, though, that comes with a qualifier because he just had a really, really good moment with an emotional send-off, and the joke, while funny in isolation, undercuts that moment. Again, even with the humor, it's like good moments that don't coalesce to something for me. What else? Did you see that coming attraction for Christopher Nolan's Tenet? That looks cool. Okay, on to the bad, because even the things in this film that was good, they come with things that are also bad. You know, everything good in this film comes with its own qualifiers. They don't change what the film did wrong, and while in isolation they may be good, with the context of the overarching film they are in, it's just not great. So the bad, here we go. This one is a little minor, but and it actually has to do less with the film itself than it does the fan backlash to The Last Jedi, but it is something that affected my enjoyment, so I have to say it. So here we go. Rose had like nothing to do and very little screen presence. She was just there to be like the coordinates they need to go to. Like, cool. And in this film, she was no longer very confident. She wasn't very headstrong. She lost basically everything that made her like an actual presence that was impossible to ignore in The Last Jedi. She was doubtful and scared, and what if we don't win? And she wasn't even in a lot of scenes, and the scenes she was in, she was just like, she just like lost her puppy or something. It's like there's this confident person somewhere, but like that's not Rose. Like what the Rose we got in The Rise of Skywalker wasn't like Rose. And it's like they filed her down, like they suppressed her, like they pushed her down a little bit. They like kicked her down a little bit, like in the films. Like her personality is just leveled down. And this is not inherently bad, but I can't help but look at a lot of the sexist and racist stuff that she dealt with online from like the worst of the fan base, and think that like maybe this was on purpose for her mental health. Like maybe they gave her less of a role in the film because, you know, they knew it would lead to more online harassment. And it feels like they gave into the fans and said, all right, well, they don't like Rose because, you know, and it's fine. You don't have to be a sexist and a racist to not like Rose. But like, if you're throwing sexist and racist comments on her to the point that she goes off of social media, then yeah, you're garbage. But like, and I feel like there's a lot more fans that are like that than we want to admit. and I feel like Disney almost gave in to them. And I'm not saying they did anything wrong. I mean, I'm sure that like they are primarily thinking about their actors, and they didn't do it because of money necessarily so much as they did it. I mean, there's a chance. I mean, I'm sure they do everything for money, but there's a chance that they were in part thinking about Rose and the outlash and the backlash and the outrage that she dealt with. And they said, why don't, and then they said, if we hold her back in the background a little bit, then, it won't be bad for her. If they make her a premier character, then the whole cycle will start over again. So they might have been thinking about her. Either way, the whole situation is just so sad. It's like I feel like they pushed her down and hid her away because some people just can't not like a movie without being like the worst people on the planet, and it's just sad. I don't know. I personally would have thought it would have come. It would have been cool if she came with the rest of the cast on the starship. That they're doing their adventures on. Like, it would have been cool if she was there along with the Star Wars road trip that this movie is doing. Speaking of Star Wars road trip, the next big issue that I had, this is one of the bigger ones, is that the Star Wars road trip was a huge letdown, and it was just lame. The characters don't really do anything other than make jokes and yell at Rey for being, too risky or throwing herself out there too much or being in danger too much. Rey suddenly wants to make the whole journey alone. Even though the whole thing about her arc was that, she was one person, she was, powerful, but she was doing the right thing for her friends, and to all of a sudden be like, now I gotta be by myself and run away again like it did in The Force Awakens. It seems like a regression to me. And it's just, there's a lot of conflict between them that's manufactured when it didn't have to be. There's a lot of character development, especially with The Last Jedi. There's a lot of stuff that Rian Johnson gave to these characters that JJ had to work with. But instead, the conflict is manufactured. Like Poe and Finn, it seems like they're just yelling at each other because both of them are stressed about the war, but none of their personalities are in it. They're just like yelling. It's just shouting. And outside of that, they all act like great friends that know each other a whole bunch, but they've barely spent any time together. And the worst part about it is that neither of them really talk about what they've learned in their travels alone, which is like a huge missed opportunity for me. I mean, I'm not saying they had to do this, but one of my hopes for this film was that since each character had their arcs in the films, each character has kind of grown into the hero. Like, kind of like how Luke, like by the third movie, Luke's development was almost done. He was developed into the hero that he was going to become. I was thinking that Rey and Poe and Finn all had their moments of growth in The Last Jedi, and they were all growing into the heroes that they needed to be, but they all learned different lessons. It was all surrounding the same point about failures and the next generation stepping up to do better. It all fit into that, but they also learned their own individual lessons. And I felt like because of that, they each had something to teach each other. And a good film in this franchise could be, a good third movie in my eyes would be them traveling, trying to find something, which is kind of what they were doing. But instead of just exposition dumps, they each teach each other lessons. Maybe Rey goes after Kylo, but then Poe stops her and says, like, we don't need any more dead heroes. Or maybe, Rey tries to sacrifice herself and Finn comes in and says, like, you don't need to sacrifice yourself. And, or Rey comes in with Poe and Finn and talking about how they're not special. They aren't Leia. And she says that you don't have to be special to make a difference in this war. And she can teach them something. They can teach her something. I don't know. I thought it would be a cool dynamic here, and their personalities clash. In this movie, the personalities don't clash. It's just occasionally they yell at each other, and then eventually the thing just gets solved by blasting at it, or Rey doing something with the Force. It's like there's no. It's like every scene in this movie is just taking up time until something happens, but then nothing happens. I don't know. Instead, they spend like 30% of their time talking about MacGuffins and 70% of the time making quips. Okay, well, that's not entirely true. Some of the runtime is also spent making these like hollow speeches about hope or whatever, or the Force. But it's just so much wasted potential. Speaking about Poe and Finn, Poe and Finn threw their character arcs from The Last Jedi into the trash compactor. Finn especially. There's one time where Finn literally looks at the Rose and says, I gotta stay on this exploding ship so that I can do some dangerous thing. And it's like literally a mirror, like the exact opposite of the scene in The Last Jedi, where Rose stops Finn from sacrificing himself because the point was living not just to fight another day, but living to rebuild a new society from the ashes. It's like it's the last. It's like it's the entire point of The Last Jedi was like that, was not fighting what you hate but saving what you love. Like, and then in this movie, they're like, nah, we gotta sacrifice ourselves still. Go back to the ship, Rose. It's just like what? Like, man, like why? Why? Like it's like willfully doing the exact opposite of The Last Jedi. It's like they reversed the arc and they added nothing to replace it. They didn't build on it. They could have just left it alone. But they didn't just do that. They literally threw away The Last Jedi's arc. This is why I say things like, why I personally think that this film tainted The Last Jedi for me, because it just threw away so much. It went back on so much, and I felt like this film was going somewhere that other blockbusters weren't, and it's just, nope. And before anyone says that, Finn sacrificed himself because this was their last push, so of course he had to sacrifice himself. First off, no, he didn't. Again, the point was that no matter what push it is, the point is living to fight another day and living to create a new society. Okay, the whole point is not sacrificing yourself to save the day. It's about saving the day smart, saving the day in a way that will help you stop this thing from happening again. It's about stopping the cycle of violence in this, galaxy. And I don't know, it was also the writer's choice to specifically emphasize that Finn was trying to be a hero and sacrifice himself. They do it through the music and the camera angles. Rose has like a worried look on her face. Also, they kind of hint at him and Rose being romantically related, and I thought that would be romantically connected, and I thought that'd be cool if they had a relationship, but no. And it's nothing has to have, that not necessarily means that like everyone has to have a relationship, but like I felt that's what The Last Jedi was building to personally. I mean, it didn't look like a friendly kiss that Rose gave him, like Rose gave Finn. But anyway, Poe didn't fare much better. Poe's arc in The Last Jedi was learning how to like fight smart, know when to retreat, trying to create less dead heroes. Very similar lesson to Finn's, but whereas Finn's lesson was more about not sacrificing himself, Poe's was about like not letting other people sacrifice themselves under his lead. But now he just is like, screw it, we're going to fly directly to the home base of every Star Destroyer ever. They each can destroy planets, and we're going to fly there, and we're going to get them. You'll see. It's like, it's literally the the movie ends the way The Last Jedi begins before he goes on the arc. It's like they were trying to throw it away. It's like they were trying. The other returning characters don't fare much better. By the way, the older characters. Lando is cool. Leia is fine. She doesn't have much to work with. But Luke's scene was a complete letdown. And I'm going to talk about this one for a little bit. To explain why. It's a microcosm of a lot of what I don't like in these movies. So, first off, the scene is Rey is going to the island to disconnect herself from the Force because she's afraid that she's Palpatine. We're going to talk more about that later, but in response to her being Palpatine, that's actually not a bad response for Rey as a character. She's throwing pieces of ship into the burning pile of wreckage. And then she tries to throw the lightsaber in it, and Luke catches it. And this whole scene is mirroring both the fact that in The Last Jedi, he threw the lightsaber, and also maybe mirroring the scene with Yoda setting the tree on fire. Yoda was a sage figure, and the fire and the pile of fire was significant. And in a similar way, Luke is coming out of the fire and is the sage figure, talking to Rey to give her advice. The Padawan. Anyway, it's kind of a nice little thing with the Force. Like Yoda and the other older Force users usually emphasize how the Force is more than physical objects, more than just weapons or crude matter or Jedi books. In the burning of The Last Jedi, Luke was reminded of this lesson again, reminded that the Force was more than physical. And this flows nicely into his ending in The Last Jedi, where he Force projected himself to save the day, to be more than just a physical, mortal person, but instead a spiritual, immortal symbol. If he showed up there physically, he could have been killed, but as a symbol, he couldn't. That was the whole point of his projection. He was the definition of using the Force for defense, never for attack. So, in The Rise of Skywalker, when he catches the lightsaber, he then places a weird emphasis on it being bad to throw away your weapon. He's like, it's not a smart thing for a Jedi to throw away his trusty sidekick. It's like the exact opposite of the Force being more than the physical. It's like the prequels where it's like, this weapon is your life. It's like that scene was criticized in the Red Letter Media review for a reason, because it makes the Force feel small. It makes the Force feel like just a thing, like you can get good at. It's not like a thing related to like your trauma or your personality or getting over your issues. It's like it's just a thing now. Now the lightsaber is important again. And like there's not a lot of precedent for this in the original trilogy and even the sequel trilogy. Like lightsabers themselves were never super important in the other movies beyond what they thematically represented to the character. Like let's and this is why I'm going to take a long time to explain this. Let's go through this together. Luke's blue saber in the original trilogy was given to him by Obi-Wan. The green lightsaber was his own that he made himself when he was a Jedi Master. Yoda himself was green. Luke got a green saber when he too became a Jedi Master like Yoda. See, it rhymes. When Luke chooses not to Force project himself with a green lightsaber and instead Force project himself with a blue one in The Last Jedi, it's because the green one is associated with him almost killing Kylo Ren. Or Ben Solo at the time. It's associated with a dark side impulse that Luke had, a dark memory. Then the blue lightsaber he spawns in with is recontextualized as Luke sort of returning to the wide-eyed hero of the story one last time, the unambiguously good hero. Vader's saber in the original trilogy just represents how he was a former Jedi who turned to the dark side. You know, it's a saber like the Jedi have. Palpatine didn't have a saber. He was just a Sith Lord. But Vader does because he was a Jedi also. At least that's what it was before the prequels just made it like red lightsabers are a Sith Lord thing. But anyway, in the sequel trilogy, the only significance Luke's saber ever has to Rey, the blue one, is that it embodies the light side of the Force itself, leaving Luke Skywalker and calling out to her instead. Then it represents her path to being the hero we all know she can be toward the end of The Force Awakens and throughout The Last Jedi. Kylo's lightsaber is, again, kind of like a dark side, just generic dark side. Now all dark side people have red lightsabers now thing. But Kylo's saber is unique. It kind of mirrors Darth Vader's lightsaber, but it also has a crossguard because the crystals Kylo used were too powerful for the saber. It's a dark side weapon not fitting its purpose and something too powerful bursting out. And this is the perfect representation of Kylo himself. It represents his rage and his overcompensation, his desperately trying to show everyone how dark he is, including himself, when deep down he knows the dark side doesn't fit him, like the crystal doesn't fit his saber. And it's this power bursting out inside of him because Kylo is a powerful person. It's everything that Kylo is. So when Luke suddenly cares about lightsabers as this super important weapon, as important in of itself, acknowledging the importance of the saber, it kind of ruins all that. Like, Luke could have just, caught the lightsaber and not said anything, and it would have just been, a mirror of the scene in The Last Jedi. It could represent Rey almost making the same mistake Luke did. But then he starts talking about it like it's this awesome thing by itself with no thematic context, and it just kills it for me. And it does the same thing with Leia's lightsaber too. It's just a thing that's like significant. And it just makes these lightsabers into like these icons, these bits of merchandise. It's like the significance is no longer related to character development. It's because, don't you remember Luke Skywalker? Luke was important. Don't you remember Leia's lightsaber? Leia's was important. Buy it in stores now. It's just something that we, the audience, recognize. It's like a Family Guy joke. It's like, remember this, you remember this, you're good, and you're included in the culture because you remember this. It's just so shallow. Like, I know I spent a lot of time on this, but it's a microcosm of what went wrong with this movie. It's taking things that were cool thematically, and it's making them more about, like, the lore, but not even in a way that's cool, like some of the prequel stuff was, just in a way that's like, remember this? A lightsaber. Vroom, vroom. You're smart for remembering it. Good job. Like, just stop. Just stop it. Also, something else that bothered me about that scene, Luke proceeds to lift the Falcon out of the water on the island, and it really should have been Rey that did that. Like, move over, dude. Like, you had your trilogy. Like, you can still have Luke be part of the moment. Just have him smile while Rey lifts the X-Wing or out of the water. And see, something like that, if JJ had resisted the urge to, have Luke lift the ship, it could have created this contrast, if instead of Luke lifting the ship, Rey lift the ship and then Luke smiles approvingly, it would have created this contrast between the scene in Empire where Luke lifted his X-Wing but Yoda did not smile because he was upset at Luke for leaving and saw it as a bad move, versus, how Luke now sees Rey leaving and he sees it as a good move because he knows that she's ready. It shows how the Jedi grow and evolve past one another. It shows the differences and how, Luke now looks at the next generation versus Yoda, and it could have been a really cool moment for that. And it kind of is there, but it would have been much better. It would have stuck the landing a lot more if Rey was the one that lifted the X-Wing, but nah, let's just have Luke do it so the fanboys can stop being upset that Luke doesn't have anything to do. What else? The Admiral Hux being the mole is like so worthless. Like, yeah. So remember when Admiral Hux? It turns out that he's like the mole feeding the rebellion information. Like, why? Like, why did that need to be a thing? Like, when earlier in the film, when the alien dude in the beginning said, "Oh, there's a mole in the system in the First Order," I thought that was just like, "Oh, okay, there's a mole. They have spies. It's a war. This makes sense." But apparently this was supposed to have been like a mystery that needed to be Sherlock Holmes, and the answer was the actor that is more than likely going to play the future villain in one of the new Robert Pattinson Batman movies. Like, why? Why does the Hux subplot have to be there? Why? What does Hux being a mole add? Like, once again, everything has to be lore now, so of course nothing can go unexplained. You know, it has to be. Everything needs to be explained. Everything. Even at the cost of character development in the limited 2.5-hour runtime this movie was desperately bursting out of, because my god, the pacing in this movie is like bam, 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 bam. It's like the blaster rifle from Rogue One. It's like the machine gun one. That, like, it's just, that's the pacing of this movie. It's just constantly like boom, boom, boom. We can't breathe. And then when we do breathe in the slow moves of the movie, it feels weird. And then it speeds up again and it feels too fast. And it's just like the pacing is just wow. Like, of all the things that I was worried about, the pacing in a J.J. Abrams movie wasn't one of them. The pacing in J.J.'s movies, I feel, is really good, especially in the Star Trek movie, at least in the first one. I thought that was like a really well-paced movie. But my god, this movie is just like boom, 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 boom. It's just like, it just doesn't stop. and on top of that, going back to the fact that Hux is a mole, nothing happens with Hux, or with Hux being a mole. Like, there's nothing that they do with it. They just kill him because Hux was doing it for selfish reasons. And then they just replace him with some old guy that was in the older movies, I think. I don't know. Like, and then in the end, when he dies, when the First Order is defeated, when the rebellion beats them, I don't care, because who is this guy? Because we weren't with him in the newer movies, and in the older movies, he certainly wasn't important enough that, like, people have emotional attachment to him beyond just recognizing who he is. Like, I don't know, like when random fan service Corporal Man dies, that should have been Hux. Like, Hux has been the sniveling little schmuck that, you know, the whole trilogy has been building up as this complete, just absolute worthless sack of trash in the fascist suit. And, like, if anyone deserved comeuppance, if there was anyone that would be like a satisfying, like, explosion death in this movie, it would have been Hux. Hux has constantly killed his own troops, the troops of other, and you know, the rebellion. He is literally just a nonstop, like, killing machine. He has cost more lives than maybe anyone else in the entire in any of the movies. Because not only is he killing the good guys, but he's also getting his own men killed because he's just so bad at his job. Like, Hux should have been the one to die. Like, maybe, like, in the battle, you know, and or maybe, like, he's the mole, but, you know, in the battle, you know, Hux tries to kill Kylo. Like, maybe Hux is the mole, but they don't figure out that Hux is the mole. You know, in the final battle, Hux tries to kill Kylo or stop Kylo from doing something, and that screws over the fleet. and maybe gives the heroes a chance to like do something, but then Hux dies anyway, and it shows how the dark side and fascism is not as unified as they say they are, and how they're all just petty, short-sighted idiots trying to get more power, whereas the good guys are trying to make a better world. Like, the entire theme of this movie was that there are more of us than there are of them, so that would have fit really well. Or maybe have Kylo kill Hux, you know? Like, maybe, something. Like, have Kylo storm a ship or something, and he kills the stormtroopers, and then Kylo's on his knees, like, begging him to spare his life, and just jettison him to some random planet somewhere. And then when Kylo agrees, or at this point it would be Ben Solo, he'd be like a good guy at this point, right when he turns around, Hux lifts up his blaster to fire, and then Kylo blocks the blaster blade and, reflects it back at Hux and kills him. He defended himself, he didn't attack, but also Hux got his comeuppance. Stuff like that. Like, you build up this villain and then just toss him aside for some random old dude that makes an angry face. Like, I know he's not random, but in the sequel trilogy, in the realm of the sequel trilogy, no one knows who he is. No one's like, oh no, it's that guy. Like, I don't even remember his name. Who cares? It's just... I don't know. Like, the potential for stuff is here, and then it gets pushed off the plate to make room for, like, this nice steaming pile of fan service. Like, what a waste. Like how many fans knew who this old guy was? Like, how many fans of the sequel trilogy? How many fans who are like, well, I like Star Wars no matter what. The sequel trilogies are for me. How many of you genuinely knew who this old guy was and had an emotional attachment to him? Like, I just finished watching the movie when writing this, and I still don't know who his name is. Like, why introduce a new villain only to do nothing with them? Like, why? Like, why? Jesus. Losing my voice for this shit. And we're not even that far in. Like, there's still more to go. Oh my god. So the returning heroes disappointed me, but honestly, the new characters weren't much better. Rose in The Last Jedi was a new addition, a new character that made sense for the franchise. She represented the sacrifice and the tolls of war because her sister died, while also being the first person to suggest that the issues affecting the galaxy are not because of one particular angry person, but instead were systemic. It's how the government works, how things are governed in this universe that, is the reason these wars keep happening. People profit off of these wars, so they keep happening. And to stop this cycle from repeating itself, we need to change the system that governs us, not just beat the evil people, then relax. Rose was part of the themes of the film about failure and growing beyond the older generation, growing beyond the older films even, while also appreciating them as well. But there isn't an overarching theme in The Rise of Skywalker, so the new heroes are just there for exposition dumps. Hilariously, one of them is also a stormtrooper, but they do just as little with that information as they do with Finn. And that's been a big thing for me for like all these movies. And to be fair, I don't blame Rian for it because JJ started it. But honestly, why have a character be a former stormtrooper and have a stormtrooper backstory if you don't factor it into any character development or just like even like character traits? Like, how would Finn's story change if instead of like, a stormtrooper, he was like Jyn Erso, where she's just kind of like, trying to make ends meet, trying to barely survive, flying through the galaxy, getting captured by the Empire, stuff like that, like, or the Resistance, whoever. Like what difference would it make if his story was that rather than Stormtrooper? Nothing. Same with this character. Like, did they only put it in so that, this new character could talk about how she and her crew decided not to kill civilians because the Force told them to? Like, does that add anything to the movie? Is the theme of the movie that the Force doesn't like it when you kill civilians? Like why? Why does that scene exist? It's like they wanted Finn to have another Rose, but forgot to give her anything to do. It's just, what a waste. What a waste of a potential. What a waste of the backstory of Finn too. It's just, that just grinds my gears. But it's not even the thing that I hated the most in the movie, because that would be Rey. Rey. Oh boy, Rey. Anyone who's seen the movie knew this was coming if you've actually made it this far. Rey's whole thing was that she needed to accept that she was from nowhere and her parents were no one, and sometimes bad things randomly happen to good people for no good reason. That she needs to accept it, to stop trying to look to unrealistic ideals to justify the bad things that have happened to her and move on to do the right thing. Don't forget about it. Don't try to kill the past, but also accept it, learn from it, move on. And she needed to accept where she was in life and not keep using her trauma to justify where she was in life. To quote my own video on The Last Jedi from a little under a year ago, she needed to learn that she didn't need her story to justify her life. She shouldn't let her parents or being some super special Jedi be the thing that gives her life meaning. Her life already has meaning just by her being a person, and she has the power to make a difference, so she needs to get over herself and make that difference. It was looking to these shallow, toxic ideals that led her to being so unhappy, and it was moving away from that ultimately let her save the day in The Last Jedi. Now it turns out that Villanelle from Killing Eve smuggled Rey from Russia to Jakku because she's the granddaughter of Palpatine, which means that, canonically, Palpatine fucks now. That's a thing. Palpatine fucks. Someone will have to make a Wikipedia article with the words Palpatine fucks. That's the timeline we live in. What a time to be alive. Also, he created Snoke, maybe? I don't know. Was he Snoke? Was he or did he just create Snoke? And also, everything in Rey's life has been leading to the moment where she takes the throne as the new Sith Lord, which means she has to kill Palpatine. But even if she kills him, even if it's just to save her friends, it doesn't matter. Palpatine and the souls of all the Sith Lords, because that's a thing now, will merge into her, and also all the Sith Lords ever are watching her, like the scene with Frollo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. What? What? Okay, so this whole Avatar The Last Force-Bender ritual either doesn't make sense or it implies some super dumb things. So, if killing Palpatine makes you the next Sith Lord, then why didn't Vader become a Sith? This only makes sense in two ways. One, this only happens to Rey because she's part of the Palpatine bloodline. This places extra emphasis on the dumbest part of this reveal, which is that it turns out that the Force really is just a bloodline thing and has nothing to do with what you do as a person or who you are or who the Force chooses. It's all about bloodline. It's all about biology. Guys, this is just doing midichlorians with extra steps. Didn't we all think that was lame before? Why is it cool now? Why, guys? Why? Well, it's not cool, actually. It's dumb. And if you like midichlorians, you're wrong. And you belong in Star Wars jail with the prequels and the Christmas special. Seriously, midichlorians were dumb. And I was I was kind of hoping that this film series would sort of soft retcon that and just ignore them. You know, maybe they were wrong about midichlorians. The Jedi were wrong about a lot of things in the prequels. Maybe midichlorians was one of them. Like, maybe they were just so obsessed with, like, the just weird monk-like, emotionless sort of Jedi training thing that they had going on in the prequels that, like, the bloodline thing was just never questioned. That's what I always assumed. But apparently it is about bloodlines, and that just kills so much of why I like the sequel series. See, I liked the sequel series partly because it made it so that the Force was more about the individual again, your personality, more about the spiritual, more about tapping into nature and overcoming your personal issues. It was more about just being a good person. You know, the Force chooses people that it thinks will be able to follow the path. They're the people that'll be able to actually win the fight if they're given the power. That's how I always thought of it. Now, it's just like you're born powerful. Like, wow, how exciting. Because if there's one thing we don't have enough of, it's young people with brunette hair being the chosen ones because the villain gave them powers. Like it's just Harry Potter. Like, why? The only other explanation to this is that it has less to do with your bloodline and more to do with your intentions. Like, I guess Rey's intentions, maybe they weren't good enough. Like, maybe because she was there to kill him for revenge for killing her parents instead of killing her for purely selfless reasons for the rebellion. And this kind of makes sense because later on Ben Solo joins her, and now all of a sudden Palpatine is like, oh no, now them killing me is a bad thing, and it's confusing and not explained, and just God, I hate this so much. The whole point of The Last Jedi is that you don't have to be a chosen one to make a difference. In a series that's very heavily dependent on like the Force and people having destinies, it's cool to sort of say, screw destiny, I'm my own person. And in a way, that's what the Palpatine stuff kind of does. You know, in the sequel trilogy, Rey has always struggled with her identity. She looked to different places for identity, and then in The Last Jedi, she looked internally for meaning. And that's where she found her true identity and her peace, and she made peace with her parents being nobodies. And now, all of that is thrown out of whack when it turns out that she's Palpatine's granddaughter, and she has to contend with the fact that everything she believed is a lie. And now, how strong of a person she is being tested. Like, yeah, you thought that you liked yourself for who you are. Well, now you're Palpatine's granddaughter. Do you still like yourself? I think that that's an interesting angle. Or it could be if it didn't do so while also, you know, alienating everything about The Last Jedi, because it's about how they frame it for me. I think that in this film, how it's framed is everything is still a mystery. You know, it's like my parents are still a mystery. She's still having, you know, dark thoughts about her parents. She's still struggling with that. That's still trauma for her. There's something off, something missing. She isn't like balanced. She's having trouble connecting with the Jedi. Personally, I think what would make the Palpatine stuff work, if we had to do it, what would make it work is if in the beginning of this movie, in the Rise of Skywalker, she was like super at peace. She was like the superhero. She had no bad thoughts. She was perfectly fine with just being Rey. And there are flashes of that in this movie, like when they go to the desert planet and someone asks her what her full name is, she's like, I'm just Rey. And, you know, she does it with like a smile on her face, and you can tell she's kind of content with the fact that she's just Rey. And that's a good scene. I want that energy to be all that Rey is before she finds out that she's a Palpatine. And then when the Palpatine stuff comes in, then she starts doubting herself. Then she starts doubting the lessons that she already learned. Then she starts saying, am I really okay just being me? I thought I was from nothing and I was fine with that, but what if I was born to be evil? Now that I've finally committed to the good path, now it turns out that I was set forth on the dark path the whole time. And now that twist makes a little bit more sense. Now that twist is drama. It's not a mystery, it's throwing everything out of whack. If that twist happened, say, way earlier in the movie, and she was like forced to contend with that earlier in the movie, throughout the movie. It did happen pretty early in the movie, but if she was forced to like contend with the fact that she was a Palpatine earlier, and you know, instead of it being like a mystery that she has to figure out, where she shoots lightning out of her hands and half the audience is like, oh, I knew it, and the other half of the audience is like, oh no, please don't make her a Palpatine, please. Either way, that's how it's there now. If instead she knew she was a Palpatine, but she was hiding it from everybody else because she was scared of how they would react and how her new family would react. Now that she's finally got her stuff together, she's the one that's supposed to be responsible for saving everyone, and now she's a Palpatine and she has to hide it from everyone. And then maybe make Kylo later in the movie be the one that reveals it to her friends, and then have a moment where they question their allegiance to her, or they yell, and maybe they're like, you know, they're not mad that she is a Palpatine, but maybe Poe is mad that she's a Palpatine because he's like, I've been fighting this war and you're the granddaughter of the person that I'm fighting. Whereas Finn wouldn't be mad that Rey is a Palpatine. Maybe he's mad that Rey didn't tell him, that she didn't trust him enough. And he's just disappointed by that, like after all that we've been through and yada, yada, yada. And then she runs away to the island. And then when she comes back, then her friends have her back, and it's like, we still have your back because we're still in this together. And that, you know, it's not super original, but that'd be cool. You know, if instead of it being like a mystery, or it was supposed to be a mystery, Rey knew for a lot of the movie, like from the beginning, maybe we have like a few scenes of her being at peace, and then she's told, you're a Palpatine, and then the rest of the movie is her trying to hide that fact. Like, rather than, like, in the movie, they kind of have this, they have her, like, hiding the fact that she thinks something is off, which is kind of like, it doesn't really hit home. It's like she's hiding the fact that there might be something off with her and something about her parents that might be a little off. It's too vague to have any real stakes. It's like, where it's like half supposed to be like this stakes, like this thing that Rey's supposed to be hidden, but we, the audience, and Rey herself don't know what she's hiding. So it just didn't work for me. I think that if she knew she was a Palpatine, but like the rest of the crew didn't, and she was forced to hide that, then the lightning comes out of her hands, and they're like, "What was that?" And she's like, I don't know. Maybe Kylo acted through me or something. Like, she was the one that said that lie. Instead of like Finn trying to make her feel better, she was the one that lied about it. And then later when it comes out, it's like the friendship is ruined, and there's not as much motivation for, like, from their generals to go into battle, and they have to put their feelings aside and go into this. But then eventually they accept Rey again, and that's when they turn the tide of battle, and like making the action beats correlate to the characters. Okay, all right, but yeah, that, I think the Palpatine thing actually could have worked a little bit. The problem is they didn't make it character focused, they made it lore focused. They didn't have both working together. JJ just wanted to solve the mystery because he put it in the movies, and he wanted his mystery to be solved. That's the impression I got. There is no thematic reason for Rey to be Palpatine. Or there was, but it wasn't nearly as important as the lore reason for her to be Palpatine. And that's the impression I got. I'm not saying that, not necessarily going to say that there is no theme, there is nothing there, because I do think there was inklings of things there. But every time that it could have potentially gotten in the way of like the lore and mystery aspects of JJ's story, it was tossed aside, and as a result, it just felt, the character moments just felt really lacking. So with the way they did it, it's no longer a story about someone from nowhere being special by accepting themselves and their trauma, but about someone choosing between being special but evil and special but good. And it's reflected in the end where she takes the Skywalker name. She's still super special, but now she's a good special. And that could have been cool. Imagine the thing I just outlined, and then in the end she takes the Skywalker name. In the end, she accepts that she was not bound to that path. She went through so much, and now she's not bound. That's what they were trying to do. There's like, she's not bound to being evil. Luke and Leia were her sort of pseudo parents, so they're the name that she takes. The lessons that they taught her are just as important to who she is as her first name, maybe more so. But I don't know. Honestly, I think anything relating to destiny or being born powerful is just lame, like super lame. This is going to go a little off topic, but it's like, I hate that kind of stuff because I like my characters having like actual agency. And I don't know, the best way I can describe it is, it's like that scene from The Matrix where Morpheus asks Neo if he believes in fate. And Neo responds, no, because he wants to be in control of his own life. And Morpheus is like, I know exactly what you mean. It's like, that's how I feel about destiny in plots. I don't like it because I want my heroes to be in control of their own life. A destiny takes agency away from the characters and instead says, well, they're doing it because that's what they're supposed to do. It's not like they have to make decisions. It's not like anything can happen. This has to happen. It doesn't add anything thematically to things that are going on. It just sort of kills the agency. They have to do that cosmically, according to the Force or the destiny, the chosen one, the prophecy, whatever. They aren't doing it because their characters making decisions that they don't necessarily have to make. They have to make the decisions. So I don't like that stuff, and I don't like thinking about the elements of Star Wars that try to say this was supposed to happen because of the Force, because it just bothers me. I think that the sequel trilogy has kept it murky enough that it's easy for me to ignore. It's like, yes, there's a balance, yes, there's a Force, and there are some things that kind of have to happen, but it's very vague how it happens. I see Kylo Ren striking down his true enemy in The Last Jedi. I see Rey and Kylo side by side. I see us side by side fighting the Darth Sidious. Stuff like that. It's vague, but it's something that has to happen. But how it happens and the reactions and responses and the effects of that happening is still up in the air. So there's enough agency, and then there's things like Rey getting more powerful because Kylo is getting more powerful. In some ways that bothers me a little bit. I don't like Rey's power level to be decided by how much genocide Kylo does. But at the same time, it's up to Rey to figure out what she needs to do with the power, or whether or not she'll intervene into the rebellion and how she'll be able to get over herself to use the power responsibly. So she still has agency in her own story. But now she's Palpatine's granddaughter, and she was destined to be on the throne the whole time. Every single move in her entire life was destined to bring her to that point, including the last two movies. You know, Snoke was supposed to be on the throne and supposed to be killed by Kylo, and everything was supposed to happen this way. It's just... these last two movies were just gearing up for Rey to talk to the Star Trek Borg version of Palpatine, and that's just lame. There's just so much stupid stuff. Like, Rey shoots Force lightning on accident, so is Force lightning now, like, biologically transmuted? Like, she shoots lightning because Palpatine does, and Palpatine is, like, super powerful after sucking the life force from Kylo and Rey, like it's some kind of Dragon Ball Z battle, and then he literally goes Super Saiyan on the whole fleet. It's like everything is circling the drain around this really stupid plot point that could have been decent, but instead is just really stupid. And it's a plot point that I thought The Last Jedi, in part, was supposed to be deconstructing. That may still be the case. I don't know if Rian Johnson saw this coming. But, you know, like, I felt like the Force was about who you were as a person, but actually it's even more than that. I thought that, you know, it was about how people who struggle tend to have the Force more. You know, Rey, Finn being someone taken in slavery, Poe with his piloting skills, you know, Luke, you know, wanting to make a difference in the world, you know, the Broom Kid, who's literally like a slave holding on to the hope of Luke Skywalker. You know, these people are the ones that get the Force, the oppressed, the people that have the crap kicked out of them in life, because they're the ones that don't have a lot of power, and they're good people, so when they get the power, they know the responsibility in using it. And you know, they know, because they know how bad things can get, and they don't want that to happen to everyone else. And I thought that was cool, but now it's Rey could have been anyone, and she still would have had the Force. It's just because, you know, she's a Palpatine. You know, she's no longer a Rey from nowhere. You know, she's someone. It's just, it kills part of The Last Jedi for me. I think the worst thing it does is all these changes just make the universe feel so small. You know, it's all about these two bloodlines. It's all about trinkets and lore items and just having physical things. It's not about powerful people learning to, you know, approach their feelings in healthy ways, or get over the things, their personality flaws, or get more responsible or more mature. There's nothing there but the Force itself. There's no substance. Honestly, it feels like everything I don't want as a response to The Last Jedi. Every fear I had going in was realized. It's all just a pile of Jedi texts that someone's going to publish on Wikipedia, and honestly, I'm crushed. That's how I'm ending it. I'm sorry. I didn't want this to be negative either. I had outlines, I had plans. I was going to write about, I had planned about how, you know, to really go more in depth and make another video about the entire sequel trilogy and Rey's journey and what it means, and I was hoping that at the Rise of Skywalker, if it didn't expand on it, at the very least it wouldn't touch it, you know? I was hoping for that. If it did nothing else, if the entire thing was literally just, you know, they go on a bunch of action scenes together and then kill the bad guy. If it was no more risky than that, you know, if it was as safe as that, at the very least, it wouldn't have backpedaled on anything, you know? It would have been fine. It would have been acceptable. But it walks back on stuff. That's my problem with it. The things it introduces runs counter to the previous movie. And it's like just when I thought I was finally a fan of these movies, I got it taken away from me, and it's just sad. Like I was gonna make a again, I was gonna make another video. Like my next big video, if something is edited as The Last Jedi, was going to be linking these movies together. And it was gonna be released once I could get The Rise of Skywalker on DVD. But I was gonna start making it and writing it, and I'd already kind of had a lot of some outlines and ideas and linking these movies together. Where I thought The Rise of Skywalker was going, I had some notes on that, and then if I was gonna modify that, with The Rise of Skywalker's release, I thought it was gonna be like a tame sort of whatever film, like whipped cream on top of the ice cream that was The Last Jedi, but instead it just dumped the ice cream into the garbage disposal, and it's just I don't know. So I'm not making that video anymore. I'm making this one instead, this ramble, just vomiting my thoughts out there, because I do not want to talk about Star Wars maybe ever again. There's an exception. I have a video on The Mandalorian and why I feel like it's better than some people give it credit for. Even though I do see why some are completely unamused by it, and I definitely dislike it more than the thematically rich sort of explorations of like The Last Jedi, and I but I still like the film. I still like The Mandalorian. Sorry, not the film. I still like The Mandalorian, and I was gonna make a video on that. I may still make that video. I don't know, but I don't know if I'm gonna be able to. I don't want to say never, never, because Rian Johnson has his own trilogy. Thank God. Hopefully they don't take that away from him. Hopefully they see the response that JJ's trilogy got and said, well, you know what? At the very least, the critics like the other one. Now everyone is mixed on this one. So maybe at the very least they let Rian Johnson just do his thing. Honestly, I would have been perfectly fine if like JJ had his own trilogy and Rian has his own trilogy. I would like to see a JJ trilogy, as much as he's like more focused on lore than theme. I think an entire series dedicated to that, it wouldn't be amazing, but it could be fun. It could introduce some fun ideas, and Rian Johnson could have a more thematically rich story that, I'd really like, that could be bold and actually do something new, and JJ could play it safe but look a little flashy doing it, and whatever. Everyone has what they want. But it seems like the way I'll end on this note, but the best way I would describe this movie is somebody, it's like they whether you like, I like The Last Jedi, someone watching this may not like The Last Jedi, but this film was scientifically designed in a lab to make both of us shrug our shoulders and then never think about it again. So, yeah, I'm genuinely crushed. Yeah. Christ.